Welcome to the Professor English podcast, where we don't just talk about English, we practice English. My name is Ryan, and I am your host. Today, we are going to look at page 6 of 1984 by George Orwell. We are not just going to read this paragraph, we are going to practice speaking English with this paragraph. This is a totally unique way of practicing English. The exercises in this video will help you to improve your listening comprehension, your speaking skills. They will help you to improve your fluency and your pronunciation. If that sounds incredible to you, just give me a little of your time and practice with me. Well, let's get busy practicing English. First, we will start with a complete reading of the paragraph, and then we will go on to talk about each sentence, about the vocabulary. We will ask questions. We will make answers. Here is the entire paragraph. Winston kept his back turned to the telescreen. It was safer, though as he well knew, even a back could be revealing. A kilometre away, the Ministry of Truth, his place of work, towered vast and white above the grimy landscape. This, he thought with a vague sort of distaste, this was London, chief city of Airstrip 1, itself the third most populous province of Oceania. He tried to squeeze out some childhood memory that should tell him whether London had always been quite like this. Were there always these vistas of rotting 19th century houses, their sides shored up with bulks of timber, their windows patched with cardboard, and the roofs with corrugated iron, their crazy walls sagging in all directions, and the bombed sites where the plaster dust swirled in the air, and willow herbs straggled over the heaps of rubble, and the places where the bombs had cleared a larger patch, and there had sprung up assorted colonies of wooden dwellings like chicken houses. But it was no use. He could not remember. Well, that was pretty long, but don't worry. Now we're going to look at each sentence of this paragraph and talk about it. Now let's take a look at the first sentence. Winston kept his back turned to the telescreen. It was safer, though as he well knew, even a back can be revealing. Having your back turned to something is the opposite of looking at something, the opposite of facing something. Let's make a sentence with that phrase, a false sentence. He was facing the telescreen. Remember, that's the opposite. He was facing the telescreen. How would you ask a yes/no question with that sentence? Was he facing? Was he facing the telescreen? Can you say it like me? Was he facing the telescreen? Was he facing the telescreen? Was he facing the telescreen? How would you answer no to that question? No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't. No, he wasn't facing the telescreen. No, he wasn't facing the telescreen. No, he wasn't facing the telescreen. Let's make a how standing question. How? How was he? How was he? How was he? How was he? How was he standing? How was he standing? How was he standing? How was he standing? How was he? How was he? How was he? How was he standing? Let's say, with his back to the telescreen. He was standing with his back to the telescreen. He wasn't facing the telescreen. He wasn't facing the telescreen. He was standing with his back turned to the telescreen. He was standing with his back turned to the telescreen. His back was turned to the telescreen. He wasn't facing the telescreen. His back was turned to the telescreen. Let's talk about the phrase A back can be revealing. A back can be revealing. Reveal means show. So that sentence means a back can show information. A back can show you something. A back can show you something too. A back can give information too. The opposite of reveal is conceal, which means hide. Let's make a sentence. A back conceals information. Conceal means hide. Reveal means show. Conceal is a word for hide. A back conceals information. How would you make a basic yes/no question with that sentence? Does a back conceal? Does a back conceal? Does a back conceal information? How would you answer no to that question? No, a back doesn't. No, a back doesn't conceal. No, a back doesn't conceal information. No, a back doesn't conceal information. Let's say a back reveals information, shows information, shows people information. A back doesn't conceal information. A back reveals information. A back doesn't conceal information. A back reveals information. Let's take a look at the next sentence. A kilometre away, the Ministry of Truth, his place of work, towered vast and wide above the grimy landscape. This, he thought with a sort of vague distaste, this was London, chief city of Airstrip 1, itself the third most populous of the provinces of Oceania. A kilometre away, the Ministry of Truth, his place of work, towered vast and wide above the grimy landscape. The word vast, if you haven't seen it before, means very big. Vast, very big. And the word grimy, that's a type of dirt, dirty. That's another word for dirty. Grimy, dirty. Now, the first phrase tells us that the Ministry of Truth is a kilometre away from where Winston is. Here's a sentence. The Ministry of Truth is 10 kilometers away. That word away tells us the distance, away from here, and we're with Winston in his apartment. So not here. 10 kilometers from here is really what it means. So in this case, the here is Winston's apartment. The Ministry of Truth is 10 kilometers away. How would you make a basic yes/no question with that sentence? The Ministry of Truth is 10 kilometers away. Is the Ministry of Truth 10 kilometers away? Is the Ministry of Truth 10 kilometers away? How would you answer no to that question? No, the Ministry of Truth. No, the Ministry of Truth isn't 10 kilometers away. No, the Ministry of Truth is not 10 kilometers away. It is not. It's not. It's not 10 kilometers away. They are not 10 kilometers away. They aren't 10 kilometers away. No, they aren't 10 kilometers away. Okay, let's make a how far from Winston's apartment question. How far from Winston's apartment? How would you make that question? How far from Winston's apartment? Ministry of Truth. How far? How far from Winston's apartment? How far from his apartment? How far from his apartment? From his apartment? From his apartment? How far from his apartment is? How far from the Ministry of? How far is his apartment from the Ministry of Truth? How far from Winston's apartment is the Ministry of Truth? Instead of saying Winston's apartment, we can just say how far away, and we understand that the starting point is Winston's apartment. How far away is the ministry of truth? When you're in the place, when you're in the here, you can ask that question. How far away? Instead of just how far, most native speakers would say, how far away is the ministry of truth? And that means how far from here is the ministry of truth? How far away is the ministry of truth? How far away is the ministry of truth? And the answer is 1 kilometer. The ministry of truth is 1 kilometer away. So from here is kind of what away means here. The ministry of truth is 1 kilometer from here. The ministry of truth is 1 kilometer away. But because we're reading a book, the from here is from Winston's apartment. That's where we are in the story. Let's make another sentence. The ministry of truth is a small building. How would you make a basic yes/no question with that sentence? Is the ministry of truth a small building? Is the ministry of truth is the ministry of truth a small building? A small building? Truth a small building? Ministry of truth a small building? Is the ministry of truth a small building? How would you answer no to that question? No. No, the ministry of truth. No, it isn't. No, it isn't a small building. No, the ministry of truth is not a small building. No, it isn't a small building. It towers vast and wide. Vast means big. Wide is also a type of big. And we're using tower. Tower, you know, probably as a noun, a very tall building, but you can use it as a verb to mean it stands very tall. It stands very tall. It towers. It towers. It towers vast and wide. The ministry of truth isn't a small building. It towers. It stands very tall. It towers vast and wide. The ministry of truth isn't a small building. It towers vast and wide. Let's make another sentence. The area around the ministry of truth looks clean and fresh. The area around the ministry of truth looks clean and fresh. How would you make a yes/no question with that sentence? Does the area around the ministry of truth look clean? Does the area around the ministry of truth look clean and fresh? How would you answer no to that question? No. No, the area around the ministry of truth. No, it doesn't look. No, the area around the ministry of truth doesn't look fresh and clean. No, it doesn't look fresh and clean. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't look. No, it doesn't look fresh and clean. Let's make a how look question. How look? How does it? How does it look? How does it look? And the answer is grimy. Grimy is a type of dirty. The area around the ministry of truth looks grimy. Grimy is a type of dirty. The area around the ministry of truth looks grimy. It looks grimy. It looks grimy. It looks grimy. It looks grimy. The area around the ministry of truth looks grimy. All right, here is the next line. This, he thought with a sort of vague distaste. This was London. Distaste is a word like disgust. Ugh, disgust. And vague means not very clear. So vague distaste is, no, not ugh, but a little bit softer. Vague distaste, not very clear distaste. Maybe a little expression on his face. Vague. This, he thought with a vague distaste, is London. Okay, so you know that he doesn't like London in its current form. So let's make a sentence, which is, he feels happy when he thinks of London. He feels happy when he thinks of London. When he thinks of, when he thinks of London. When he thinks of London. He feels happy when he thinks of London. He feels happy when he thinks of London. How would you make a yes/no question with that sentence? Does he feel happy? Does he feel happy when he thinks of London? Does he feel happy when he thinks of London? Does he feel happy when he thinks of London? Does he feel happy when he thinks of London? When he thinks of London? When he thinks of London? Does he feel happy? Does he feel happy? Does he feel happy when he thinks of London? How would you answer no to that question? No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't. No, he doesn't feel. No, he doesn't feel happy when he thinks of London. Let's make a how feel question. How feel when think of London? How does he? How does he? How does he feel? How does he feel when he? How does he feel when he? How does he feel when he thinks of London? How does he feel when he thinks of London? How does he feel when he thinks of London? How does he feel when he thinks of London? Well, the answer is he feels a vague distaste. So kind of like disgusted, but not so much, a little bit. A little vague distaste. He feels vague distaste when he thinks of London. He feels vague distaste when he thinks of London. He doesn't feel happy when he thinks of London. He feels vague distaste when he thinks of London. You try to say everything. It's a pretty long sentence. He doesn't feel happy when he thinks of London. He feels vague distaste when he thinks of London. Chief City of Airstrip 1. Chief City of Airstrip 1. Chief means very important city of Airstrip 1. I guess Airstrip 1, airstrip means maybe where the planes land, where the planes take off. And so, but it sounds like Airstrip 1 is a region, and London is the most important city in that region. Chief city of Airstrip 1, itself the third most populous of the provinces of Oceania. Let's make some sentences with these next few lines. We have London is the chief city. Let's make a sentence. London is a secondary city. London is a secondary city. That means not very important. Second, third, something like that. Not a very important city. London is a secondary city. How would you make a basic yes/no question with that sentence? Is London a secondary city? Is London a secondary city? Is London a secondary city? How would you answer no to that question? No. London isn't a secondary city. Isn't a secondary city. London isn't a secondary city. London isn't a secondary city. London isn't a secondary city. Let's make a what kind of city question. What kind of city? London. What kind of city is London? 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 What kind of? What kind of? What kind of? What kind of city? What kind of city is London? Chief. It is a chief city. Chief means very important city. Maybe number one important. It is a chief city. It's a chief. It's a chief city. It is a chief city. It's a chief city. It is the chief city of Airstrip 1. It is the chief city of Airstrip 1. Here is another sentence, which is, London has a small population. London has a, London has a, London has a, London has a small population. London has a small population. London has a small population. How would you make a basic yes-no question with that sentence? Does London have a? Does London have a? Does London have a? Does London have a small population? Does London have a small population? How would you answer no to that question? No. London doesn't have a. London doesn't have a. Doesn't have a. London doesn't have a small population. Let's make a how large population question. How large? How large is the population? How large is the population of London? How large is the population of London? Let's say the third most populous. The third most populous. It is the third most populous city. It is the, it's the, it's the, it's the third. It's the third most populous city in the province of Oceania. Can you say all of that? It's the third most populous city in the province of Oceania. Okay, here is the next sentence. He tried to squeeze out some childhood memory that should tell him whether London had always been quite like this. Squeeze is an action with your hand. You squeeze fruit, like maybe you squeeze an orange or you squeeze a lemon. That's squeeze. It's a very hard pressing of your fist. Squeeze. Squeeze out is a phrasal verb. And squeeze out means produce something, but it's very difficult to produce. So he's trying to get this memory. He's trying to squeeze his brain like a lemon and produce a memory from it. So it's very difficult for him to remember this. So he's trying to remember how London was when he was younger, but it's very difficult. He's squeezing his brain, trying to get that memory out of his brain. Here is a sentence about this phrase. Winston could easily remember the old London. Winston could easily remember the old London. How would you make a basic yes-no question with that sentence? Could he easily easily remember the old London? Could he easily remember the old London? How would you answer no to that question? No, he couldn't. No, he couldn't easily. No, he couldn't easily. No, he couldn't easily remember. No, he couldn't easily remember the old London. Let's make an even though statement. Now remember, even though means not important, doesn't matter. Okay, so whatever I say after even though means this was not important. This didn't matter. I'll leave a link to an even though exercise in the description of this podcast. So if you want to practice using even though, you can find a link there. But even though means, oh, this doesn't matter, it's not important. Even though he tried to squeeze out some memory. That means it doesn't matter he tried to squeeze. He tried very hard to remember. Doesn't matter he tried very hard to remember. Even though he tried to remember, even though he tried to squeeze out a memory, even though he tried to squeeze out the memory, he couldn't remember the old London. So that means he tried very hard, but it didn't matter. It didn't work. He couldn't remember the old London. Even though he tried to squeeze out the memory, he couldn't remember the old London. All right, were there always these vistas of rotting 19th century houses, their sides shored up with balks of timber, their windows patched with cardboard and roofs with corrugated iron, their crazy garden walls sagging in all directions. Were there always vistas of rotting 19th century houses? Vista is another word for view. So were there always views of these old buildings? And rotting means falling apart, no good, dying. So rotting buildings means very old buildings. Nobody is taking care of them. They're falling apart. These buildings are dying. Rotting buildings. Usually rotting is used for food. So you should have a red apple. If you have a black apple, it's a rotten apple. Bananas are yellow, but if you have a black banana, it's a rotten banana. If you have a rotten building, that's a building that's dying or dead. No good anymore. Can't use it. Rotten. Rotten. So could you always see just all these old houses falling apart? That's what he's wondering. Was it always like this? These old buildings falling apart, dying? Let's make a sentence. The houses in his neighborhood were modern and well cared for. The houses in his neighborhood were modern and well cared for. How would you make a basic yes-no question with that sentence? Were the houses in his neighborhood? Were the houses in his neighborhood? Were the houses in his neighborhood modern and well cared for? Were the houses in his neighborhood modern and well cared for? Were the houses in his neighborhood modern and well cared for? Let's answer no to that question. How would you say no? No, the houses. No, the houses in his neighborhood. No, the houses in his neighborhood weren't modern. No, the houses in his neighborhood weren't modern and well cared for. No, the houses in his neighborhood weren't modern and well cared for. Let's make a how his neighborhood looks question. How his neighborhood looks. How would you make a question with that information? How does his neighborhood look? How does his neighborhood look? Describe his neighborhood. Tell me what his neighborhood looks like. How does his neighborhood look? Let's answer with there are. There are views. What's another word for views that we used in this paragraph? Vistas. There are vistas. There are vistas of 19th century houses. What is a way to say falling apart, or no good, or dying? Rotting. There are vistas of rotting 19th century houses. They're dying. They're like a black banana or a black apple. They're rotting. There are vistas of 19th century houses. So no, the houses in his neighborhood are not modern and well cared for. There are vistas of rotting 19th century houses in his neighborhood. Let's take a look at the next sentence. But before we do, I just want to remind you that if you find these exercises helpful, please take a moment to subscribe to my channel so that you won't miss the next analysis of a paragraph of 1984. And if you are practicing this on my YouTube channel, Professor English ESL class, don't forget to press the like button. It helps my channel so much and lets me know that you find this exercise useful and helpful. Now, let's keep practicing English. And the bombed sites where the plaster dust swirled in the air and the willow herbs straggled over heaps of rubble. Plaster is the material of which walls are made, or were made. Now they call it drywall, and I think it's a different material, but it's kind of a similar texture. So in an older building, the material of the walls on the inside of a building are usually plaster, that white material. And swirl is a circular motion. So if the wind is blowing and there's plaster dust, it could look like a little tornado. A swirl of plaster dust. heaps of rubble. Heap is like a little mountain, a little pile. And rubble is a word you use for pieces of a building that has fallen down. So if a bomb drops suddenly on a building, you will find pieces of the building in the street. You would call that rubble. So if there are heaps of rubble in the street, that means maybe somebody later came and took the pieces of the building and put them and made a little mountain of rubble, of little pieces of the building to try and clean the street, clear the street. And the willows straggling over the heaps means that the willows were growing over these little mountains or heaps. So straggle is like an unorganized group, kind of an ugly, unattractive group of something. And so the willows growing over the heaps, I guess the heaps are pretty old. They've been sitting there for a long time. And now some flowers or something are growing over it in a very unorganized, unattractive way. So heaps of willows straggled over the willows straggled over the heaps of rubble. So they're growing over in very unorganized, unattractive ways. Let's make a sentence with the information in this paragraph. The air in his neighborhood was clean. 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 Let's make a yes/no question with that sentence. Was the air in his neighborhood? Was the air in his neighborhood clean? Was the air in his neighborhood clean? How would you answer no to that question? No, the air in his neighborhood. No, the air in his neighborhood. No, the air in his neighborhood wasn't very clean. No, the air in his neighborhood wasn't very clean. Let's make a why not question. Why not clean? Why not clean? Why wasn't the air in his neighborhood clean? Why wasn't the air in his neighborhood clean? Why wasn't the air in his neighborhood clean? Let's answer with plaster dust swirled in the air. Swirl is a circular motion, just like a tornado. The air in his neighborhood wasn't very clean because plaster dust swirled in the air. The air in his neighborhood wasn't very clean because plaster dust swirled in the air. Let's make another sentence about this phrase. His neighborhood was very tidy. His neighborhood was very tidy. Tidy means neat or organized, and sometimes it means clean. Clean in the sense of very organized, very, very neat. His neighborhood was tidy. How would you make a basic yes/no question with that sentence? Was his neighborhood tidy? No, his neighborhood wasn't tidy. No, his neighborhood wasn't tidy. Let's make a why not question. Why not? Why wasn't his neighborhood tidy? 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 And the reason is there were heaps of rubble. There were heaps of rubble. His neighborhood wasn't tidy because there were heaps of rubble everywhere. His neighborhood wasn't tidy because there were heaps of rubble everywhere. Rubble, little pieces of destroyed building, usually from a bomb or some other destruction, some other horrible event. His neighborhood wasn't tidy because there were heaps of rubble everywhere. We'll say everywhere. It doesn't say that in the book, but I'm saying it. Let's take a look at the final phrase of the paragraph. And the places where the bombs had cleared, a larger patch, there had sprung up assorted colonies of wooden dwellings, like chicken houses. But it was no use, he could not remember. Spring up is a phrasal verb. Spring means jump up quickly, go up quickly. And spring up means jump up quickly. And when you say something springs up, it just suddenly appears from nowhere. Dwelling is a word for house. It's another word for house. The verb to dwell means to live in a place. A dweller is a person who lives in a particular place, and a dwelling is a place where people live. In other words, a house or a home. So if you say wooden dwellings sprung up, it means little wooden houses, little wooden places where people live suddenly appeared. One day there were no homes. The next day, suddenly, there were little wooden houses everywhere. Little wooden houses sprung up. They just appeared suddenly. Let's make a sentence with this phrase. His neighborhood is well organized. How would you make a basic yes/no question with that sentence? Is his neighborhood well organized? Is his neighborhood well organized? Is his neighborhood well organized? How would you answer no to that question? No. His neighborhood isn't well organized. No, his neighborhood isn't. No, his neighborhood isn't well organized. And we know that because if you can just build, one day there's no house and the next day there's a house, there's no planning involved. That's just chaos. So houses springing up, that means it's not very well planned. It couldn't be. So no, his neighborhood isn't well organized. Let's make a how-no question. How you know? How you know that? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know that his neighborhood isn't well organized? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know? How do you know that his neighborhood isn't well organized? Here is the reason. Because there are little wooden dwellings springing up everywhere. That's not organization. That can't be. There are little wooden dwellings springing up everywhere. I know that his neighborhood isn't well organized because there are little wooden dwellings springing up everywhere. All right, we have looked at this paragraph in a very intuitive and interactive way, and I think that if we read this paragraph again together without stopping, the words should be much more understandable to you now, and the idea also should be much more understandable. So let's take a look. Let's read the entire paragraph together one more time and test this out, see if it works, okay? Let's see. Winston kept his back turned to the telescreen. It was safer, though as he well knew, even a back can be revealing. A kilometre away, the Ministry of Truth, his place of work, towered vast and white above the grimy landscape. This, he thought with a vague distaste. This was London, chief city of Airstrip 1. Itself the third most populous of the provinces of Oceania. He tried to squeeze out some childhood memory that should tell him whether London had always been quite like this. Were there always these vistas of rotting 19th century houses, their sides shored up with bulks of timber, their windows patched with cardboard, and the roofs with corrugated iron, their crazy garden walls sagging in all directions, and the bombed sites where the plaster dust swirled in the air, willow herbs straggled over the heaps of rubble, and the places where the bombs had cleared a larger patch, there had sprung up assorted colonies of wooden dwellings, like chicken houses? But it was no use. He could not remember. Well, what do you think? Was it easier to understand the second time around after we discussed everything? I hope that you said yes. If you didn't say yes, watch the video again. Watch it several times. Practice it until it's easy for you to understand, until you can make all of the questions and give all of the answers and understand all of the words. This is a pretty unusual and experimental way of practicing English, and I'd really like to know what you think. So please leave a comment and tell me if you found this exercise helpful and if you would like to see more exercises just like this one. It's been really fun practicing English with you today, and I hope to see you again soon. So don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and please don't forget to press the like button. I will see you in the next paragraph of 1984 by George Orwell with more practice and more vocabulary.